Hello. Since I didn't get quite as far as I wanted to in class in terms of demonstrating how to use Stella, I'm going to help you out by building the first model in your assignment for this week and walk you through that. And hopefully that'll give you enough background so that you can get further in that exercise before our class. So I just opened Stella here. And by default, it is in a view called a map view, which I don't think you really want to be in very often. What you really want to be in is model view, because model view is where you actually build equations for your models. Okay, so I've switched that. It needs to look like this. And this first model is of early settlers arriving on an island. So I need a stock representing the population of those early settlers. So I clicked on that, and I'm going to click here and name that early settlers. Um, and you'll notice it has this triangle here. That triangle indicates that it's not yet specified. It doesn't have enough information to run the model. I was going to give you warnings about things that need to be fixed. So I could, if I double click on that, or if I click this little arrow here, I'm going to open a little window here that allows me to edit these things. And in that, in the exercise, I've specified we're starting with a population of 10 settlers. And I'm going to add units here. It's very important to add units. And the units I'm adding are going to be, I said that the island is 1 kilometer. So this is people per km squared. It's a 1 square kilometer island. So those are my units, people per kilometer squared. And I can click off this now, and the editor will disappear. And you'll notice that little warning sign has disappeared because it has everything it needs right now. We could run this model right now. It wouldn't be very interesting because they wouldn't change because there's no capacity for them to grow. I want to add the capacity for them to grow. And as described in the exercise, in this case, I'm going to model this as I'm dragging this flow into here. The stock is highlighting, and then I'm letting go of that flow. And in this case, I'm going to model this as a net increase in the size of that settler population. And this net increase is going to be a product of early settlers and a net growth rate coefficient. I need to add that net growth rate coefficient, and for that, I'm going to use a converter. I'll click down here to a converter, and I'll call this net growth rate coefficient. I'm seeing that, but I'll drag that over here a little bit. I can rearrange things in space like this. Like I say, I have to indicate a dependency. This flow is dependent on both early settlers and net growth. And to do that, I'm going to use a connector. And so I'm going to drag a connector from early settlers into net increase to indicate that net increase is dependent on the stock size. This flow is dependent on the stock size. And a little trick I'll teach you here now. On Windows machine, I would hold down the Alt button to get the same tool that I just used. And since I just used a connector, if I hit Alt here, it's probably Option on a Mac. It's one of the buttons on the bottom. I can drag that in and use the same thing. By the way, you can always grab the handles on things and move them around to make things a little bit neater, and you can move text around to different places too if that's neater. There's a lot of neatening you can do, and having a neat model is actually very important for communication. I don't like to have things overlapping other things. So that's a pretty neat model. All right, well, these things still have these unknowns in them because they haven't been specified. In the information I gave you in the assignment, I specified that the net growth rate coefficient is going to be 0.2, and the units for this are going to be people per year. That is to say, for every person in the settler population, 1 person is going to be added per year. Actually, not 1.2 people are going to be added per year. But people per year is the same as 1 over year. So I'll just leave this as 1 over year as the units that I document down here. Documenting units is very important. If your units are not right, then your model has to be wrong. And we'll talk more about that. Okay, so these have disappeared. I need to put an equation in here, and this is going to be a simple equation, as I've already stated. It's just the product of these two things. You can see because these arrows indicate dependencies, they become required inputs here. So I'm just going to say, if I click on early settlers, it'll put that down here, and I can begin to build an equation. So early settlers times net growth rate coefficient. And you'll notice it's smart enough to know that the units for this are people per kilometer squared. You can't see it on my screen here, but it's per year. Actually, I'm going to say per month because per month is the default, but we'll change that in a second. But that's specified now, and if I click off this, this is complete. And I could run this model. There are two things I still need to do to complete this this setup here. The first is I need to specify things about the time scale over which I want this model to run. And I could go up to model specs and then go on to run specs. But I could also just double click anywhere on this, and because I haven't clicked on one of these objects, it's giving me basic information about the model in this window over here. And by default, this is going to look a little bit different. You want to have a start time of 0 and a stop time of 300. I've already entered those in here, so we're running this model for 300 years. And by default, it's going to say months here, and you're going to want to change this to years. And you can leave all the other defaults here as they are right now. So once I've set these things, the start time, the end time. Oh, you also want to set a sim duration of 15. You could set it to whatever you want, but by setting it to 15, what I'm essentially saying is I'm going to run those 300 years of simulation in 15 seconds. I'll watch it play out over a 15-second period. Um, all right. So the other thing I need to do is to actually have a way of visualizing the data. And to do that, I'm going to click on this icon up here, which is a graph, and click that down someplace within this. And maybe I'll put it right next to my model, and I can move this thing around a bit and stretch it out and make it look whatever shape I want it to. But I need to tell it what to graph. It's put a graph pad down, but it hasn't decided what it's going to graph there yet. So to do that, I need to double click on that, and it'll again open a menu here that allows me to select what kind of graph I want. And I do want to use their line graph, and I'll leave the options as default like they are, but I need to add the variables to this series list here. So if I click on this plus, it'll tell me what I have as options to graph in my model. I only have 3 elements in my model here. So these are the only things I can graph. And I do want to graph early settlers. And I'll graph the flow into early settlers. And this is not going to end up being that interesting, but I'll go ahead and graph the net growth rate coefficient. I wouldn't normally do that, but just to show you, it's a constant, so it should be just a flat line if I graph it. But you can see now, if I click off of that, you'll see my graph, and this is now fully ready to run. Now, the very important thing that I really want to stress to you is don't run your model until you've predicted the output. Uh, think about, sketch something out, talk with your partner about what you think is going to happen, what you expect, because it's the difference between what you anticipate and what you see that's actually going to help build your learning skills. If you just run the model, you'll say, oh, yeah, that makes sense, but you won't have challenged your mental model in doing that. So always sketch out what you think the behavior is before you actually run your model. Don't be lazy and just run your model. But once you've done that sketching, this little button down here is a run menu, and it would run this. But I don't want to run it because I want you to think about what it's going to do before then. So I'll go ahead and stop this here.